I am Jim Collison, and this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on July 30th, 2022. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations from around the world. If you're listening live, we'd love to have you join us in if you're listening off our live page, we'd love to have you join us in chat. Link right above us there. Take you to YouTube, sign in. You can put your questions there. If you're listening after the fact, you can always send us your questions. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcasting app or right there on YouTube so you never miss an episode. Leo Castillo is my guest today. Leo is a managing partner for Fearless Consulting with more than 20 years' experience in leadership strategy, culture change, and team development. His career started by helping companies be better through technology and IBM in the 90s, and eventually to helping companies be better through their people. He's a Gallup certified strengths coach since 2017 and is a leading voice in psychological safety in the region. Leo, welcome to Call to Coach.
Hello, Jim, and thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. I must say, before the chat, I was feeling calm, but now that I'm here and I hear your intro,
Yeah.
suddenly the nerves show up. So,
It's good. It's good. Embrace them. Nerves are good. They make you sharp. While you're taking a few deep breaths, your top five, your CliftonStrengths top five: achiever, learner, command, self-assurance, and ideation. Give us a little background on you. I read
okay.
your bio, but when other people read bios, most people check out. They'll listen to you. Give us a little bit of your background, or the highlights of your background.
Okay. So, sure. So I mentioned I started in technology. That was back in IBM. I was a resource for ASEAN. I started from a technical field, but later I was in charge of sales. And that's where I got my consulting chops. I got to learn how businesses work and how technology can help them. And just to give an idea, this was back in the 90s. And in the 90s, uh, I was there before there was Google. That's how old I am. and
Wait a
but
minute. There
what's
was a time before Google. Is that what you're
There was a
saying?
time
They haven't
before
always
Google, and
been
I
here?
was there. I remember we had to convince companies why you need computers in your
Mhm,
business, and that
mhm.
sounds so silly now. And then somebody saw me and said, "Leo, you seem to be good at this, but it seems like you have a knack for working with people." And I said, "Yeah, this is what I used to do when I was in high school, in college." I said, why don't you do this? Why don't you work with us? Help companies through their culture. I didn't realize there was a career here. I just thought, what I love to do was not something you can make money from.
Mhm.
And so that person brought me in. I started doing a lot of team building sessions. Most of them are the outdoor kind where you had to climb trees and you had to, jump off the tree.
Trust
And
exercises, right? Those kind of
yes,
fall
trust
back off tables.
exercises.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And back then we were working with only the multinational companies had the budget for that. And then they said, and as they grew older, we grew older, they said, hey, can you help us with our leadership journey? And that's when I started getting into this. So my last 20 years has been about culture. So as I've said before, I help companies through technology. Now I help companies and organizations through their people. So most of my work is really corporate, not really personal. So I consider myself more of a consultant, but I also consider myself as a coach. But most of my work is really in consulting.
This is a question I should have asked every single coach that
Yeah.
I've ever interviewed over the time. I don't know why it came to my head just today, especially
Mhm.
early in this conversation. But for you, what's the real benefit of the Clifton Strengths framework in what you
Oh,
do?
all right.
Like what brought you to that? Again,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think we
yeah.
always assume that in a lot of the
Right.
interviews that we do, but for you, what's the specific benefit for you?
Okay. I first learned about strengths when I was in living in Japan back in 2016. Back then, I think Galp was trying to hire me, and
It's
it
awesome.
didn't. I think they realized I don't speak fluent Japanese. That didn't work out. But that's how I learned about strengths. And the more I saw it, the more, oh my god, how can I have only discovered about this now? I can see how it can help companies be better. I can see how they can take care of their people better. And so when I came back to Manila, after I said, the company I was involved with back then, let's go into strengths. And these, are you sure? Because I heard that there are some that didn't have a good perception of it. No, no, no. I think I know how to sell it. I think I know how we can use it. And we really started offering it to leadership teams. So we found that strengths is great for leadership teams. They get to understand themselves better. And when they see the value, okay, I want to do this for the organization. And I
Mm.
think that's where we started building the strengths business. So for me, I think it's good for the companies we help with. But at the same time, I think it's also good for me personally because I got to understand myself better. I got to work with others better. My wife also took it. We understand ourselves each other better now. Oh, now I know why we fight.
Mm.
So I think it's really just strengths is really just a good way to understand how people are different and how you can use what makes you different into something that makes you better. So that's how I'd say the benefit of strengths is for me.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. We're going to talk a little bit about psychological safety today. Why don't
Yeah.
we, and how strengths fits into that and
Mhm.
kind of into that. Let's talk about it from a definition. What does that mean? I've heard that term being thrown around a little bit over the
Right.
last year or two.
Right.
What does it mean for folks who maybe not know what it is?
Okay. So psychological safety became a big buzzword the last few years. And there are two voices that are very active right now. One is Amy Edmondson, the other is Timothy Clark. Amy Edmondson defines it as, um, you are able to speak up without fear of being embarrassed. Okay. Uh, Timothy Clark defines this as a environment um, of rewarded vulnerability. And I know when I say that, some people, yeah, I get it. But when I run my sessions, I like to make it more down to earth. So this is how I describe it. The way I describe it is, and Jim, and maybe this has happened to you, you know, has it ever happened that, maybe you're in a group, you're a discussion, and they're going to say, hey, we're going to do this. And part of you says, should I say something? Uh, and if, and I think we've all been there, I'm assuming that's happened to you before. If we feel that I shouldn't say something, then that means you do not feel safe. Because why? You feel that they may jump on you. They might say, why did you say that? And they might question you. When that happens, that's what I like to describe as you are not safe. You do not feel safe in that team.
Mhm.
And then there's the other way. If you're in a team and then, hey, you feel, I think if I say something, it's okay. People will not jump on me. People will listen. They might not agree, but they will listen. And that's what I call psychologically safe. And when I ask people to describe the feeling, they always say the first one, it feels like you're controlled, you are blocked, you are afraid. But when you are psychologically safe, uh, you feel you can be yourself. You can just say what you want to say. And because of that, because if you're coming from yourself, then that's when you can say what you really think. And that's when you feel you're really part of the team. So yeah, so if you ask me, psychologically safety is when you feel that people are there for you and they will not jump at you.
Yeah, you asked me that question,
Yes.
have you ever felt that way? And
Yes.
lots of times as we've been working through this, the answer is no. I always say what I want to
Oh, good
say.
for you.
I always well,
Right.
but to be fair, I've been part of a privileged class that has been
Mm.
allowed, like, think about it, I'm an American, I'm a
Yeah.
male, I'm
Mm-hmm.
white, I'm
Mm-hmm.
50. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've lived in these areas where I haven't had to feel that way. And
Right.
so I think for me that's been a huge understanding over the last couple years of that, to say, well, of course I feel that way because I haven't been in those situations,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
others definitely have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so it's been, for me, it's been more of an understanding of that. It's hard to understand it when you haven't experienced it. That doesn't mean I can blow it off, right? I
Right.
need to understand it as well. So it's been the last couple years, and even the pandemic and all the things that have gone on here in the United States has been an eye-opening experience even for me, and realizing, well, yeah, I may look at this and go, what are you guys talking about? But I also come from a point of privilege. So I have to be
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have to be
Mm-hmm.
I have to be aware of that, to say,
Mm-hmm.
no, I don't know if I've had to be
Mm-hmm.
afraid to say things. Now, I'm on a new team, and I was in a meeting yesterday. We had an all-day retreat with them, and I don't know them as well. And there were some moments you're kind of like, can I, yeah, can I
Yeah.
say this? Should I say this? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But listen, that's minor compared to what what
Others
some
are. Yeah.
others
Mm.
are feeling, right,
Yeah.
in
Hmm.
this area. What are some so let's just clear the air with that, because I
Sure.
think there may be some folks listening like, yeah, of course, Jim. I mean, look at the situation you're in, right? So let's clear the air. While we're clearing the air, let's talk about some of the common myths behind
Right.
the psychological. What are some of the myths out there?
Okay. So when I talk about psychological safety, people say, "Oh, it's trust," and they've read Lencioni, they look at five dysfunctions of a team, and they say it's trust. And there is a big difference. And I actually like your example because in your case, I have a feeling when we have the status, when we have the privilege, we feel comfortable, right?
Mhm.
Or and psychological safety is it's actually a team construct. It's not a person. It's not a person. It's actually how is the team operating with each other. So okay, what makes psychological safety different from trust? First, trust is one on one. It's a one on one. So for example, I trust you. Maybe I trust Mika. Maybe I trust Pia, and that talks about the one on one situation. But psychological safety talks about how do we interact with each other, and that's different. That's a group construct, not a one on one construct. Now, I remember we've been trying to explain the difference between psychological safety and trust, and we do is in our workshops. We ask people to describe it. There was one answer there that I love. It actually came from a millennial, and this is what he said. We asked him to describe what's the difference. He said, and I'm going to use it to you now. So normally we ask, "Do you trust your mom?" Right? We ask a millennial, "Do you trust your mom?" And they will say, "Yes, I trust my mom." Okay. Do you tell your mom everything? And they say, "Oh no." Right? And then I use a different example. Have you ever joined a party or a get together where you feel you can say anything? It feels safe. When you say something, they're not gonna. Yeah. Will you give them the keys to your house? No. All right. So what's the difference? Trust is deep. Trust is something that is created through many interactions. And I like the way I like to describe trust is that you're giving the person a means to hurt you, and they will not use it. And so I think that's something that needs to happen over time. It doesn't happen overnight. So when somebody says the first time they meet you, don't you trust me? Yeah, of course. No, because I just met you. you know. But psychological safety is different. Psychological safety is you're giving other people the benefit that they're not gonna say that you're not gonna jump on them, that they're not coming from something negative. So sometimes the word I use for psychological safety is benefit of the doubt. And I think this has happened with us, Jim. Like, you meet someone new, you can't say you really trust them, but you are giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Mhm.
And that's what psychological safety is. Why is this important? Because trust takes time. Psychological safety you can practice immediately, even with people you don't know. In fact, there's even a belief, and I agree with, you can even have psychological safety with people that you don't like, as long as you give them the benefit of the doubt. So that's a very big difference there.
Leo, how does this idea of retaliation fit into that model? Then I've also heard it said that the absence of the fear of retaliation. In other words, I'm
Right.
going to say something, and you're not going to retaliate against me because of it. How does that fit in? Is that part
Oh,
of this?
definitely. If you're gonna give me the what's the opposite of psychological safety? The opposite is fear. If you're living in fear, if you're in this team, you feel afraid, you feel that you can't speak up, then you're not psychologically safe. So what's the opposite of that? And that's why psychological safety is you're operating without fear, and that's why fearless. That's the reason for that. And I think fearless is normally people think of the word fearless some being courageous. Fearless just means, hey, we can talk without fear. So if you are in a situation where you feel there's retaliation, then yeah, that's not psychologically safe.
Mhm. Mm. When I started doing the webcasts, I
Yeah.
kind of did them. I'm not. I mean, I asked for permission and some of those other kinds of things, but it's a real risk because
Yeah.
I was afraid for kind of my career. Like I thought this was one of those things that if it doesn't go well, it could end my career. Is that the same? Like
Okay.
taking a risk in the job? Is that the same thing? I mean, I wasn't afraid there were people going after me. I was just afraid of the consequences.
Yeah.
Is that also part of the same thing or different?
I would say, okay, so, okay, let me talk about taking a risk.
Yeah.
Um, There are some people who are naturally courageous. Okay. And the people who are naturally courageous, whatever the risk is, they will do it. They're gonna, I mean, I feel I'm kind of part of that. You're gonna jump off a bridge, you're gonna, I don't know, jump off a plane. That takes courage, right? And you're doing it because you're coming from your well of courage. Psychological safety is different. Psychological safety is the environment where you remove the fear. So in your case, so I don't know what happened in your case. Maybe you felt that it was okay to ask, it was okay to take a risk. The environment seemed like it was open to that, and because of that you took the risk. So that's what we mean. I like to think about, because okay, when I talk about psychological safety, they say, oh, so people should be courageous, we need to teach courage. But teaching courage is like telling the plant, hey plant, you need to grow better, you need to, you need to grow even if there's no sun. But psychological safety is making, no, you water the soil, you make sure, you fertilize it, you create the environment. That's psychological safety. Because, and the thing is, leaders, we can't make people courageous because people have different strengths, different talents, but you can control the environment. You can make the environment safe so that people don't even need courage. And that's the difference.
Are there some folks who are better at risk taking than others? Is that what
Oh,
you're saying?
definitely. That I would agree. And I think that's the old way of how companies used to work, right? If you are courageous, if you take risks, if you show up, then we will reward you, right? And so what happens? So companies only hear from the loudest people, or but as we're learning now, it's no longer the loudest people who have the best ideas. By creating psychological safety, you include the people who may not have the privilege, who may
Yeah.
not have that loud voice, who may not, so you're creating space so everyone can be part of it. And that's why teams are more effective. More people are involved, not just the courageous ones.
Yeah. Maybe a true inclusion as
Yeah.
we've gotten more familiar with that word over the last couple of years.
Mhm.
Ken asked this question: do you find that people who do not speak up will then act up if we're
Oh,
in situations where they're not allowed to speak up? Do they just act up instead?
okay. So this is what happens when there's no safety. Because psych safety, a lot of people think it's just something that makes you feel good. First is that, one thing we've learned is that people leave, especially the talented ones. They're the first to leave because, hey, you hire me, I'm a good person, but you don't really listen to me. You tell me what to do, then why am I here? They're gonna move. They're gonna go away, and that's a risk we have. So, in the case, so leaving, so when in terms of acting up, they might leave, or they might just get back at you at a different way. Okay, you're not gonna listen to me, then I'm gonna sabotage you, and that's where you don't have that's where you have the toxic environment. Every definition of a toxic environment I've ever seen describes an environment where there's no safety. So yeah, so if people don't speak up, I agree, they will act up or they will leave.
If you're in that kind of situation where it's toxic
Hmm.
and it's not, what kind of questions can you ask,
Oh boy.
or what
All
kind
right.
of things can you do to start detecting for that? I mean,
Okay.
certainly you feel it that way, right? You feel it like the team's not working, right? And it feels bad. But
Right.
how can you start getting, because the safety, just realizing it is part of the solution, but the other part's getting to it. How can we start digging in a little bit on those teams to get to the real crux of the problem, do you think?
Okay. So your
Now,
question is, when teams are toxic, how
yeah.
do we get out of that? Is that
Now,
what?
how can we start thinking, and maybe this is a little bit into kind of the material here as we're
Sure.
thinking about this, but how can we start, what can we start doing to start troubleshooting that? Like,
Okay.
what kind of mindset could I put myself in to start saying, okay, this team isn't working well. What are some questions I can ask, or things I can do, or things I could start thinking about that will help me start diagnosing this of why?
Okay.
Because
All right.
just saying it's not safe.
Right.
Okay, well, we got a bad team. How do we get to the
Okay.
kernel of the issue? Yeah.
All right. So Okay, so I'm gonna use Timothy Clark's work here. The first thing is that is everyone included? I think that's something to check. Are there pockets of people who are just talking to each other? Are people um, are people put in arm's length away? Only some people are listened to and some aren't. And that's a very good starting point. Is everyone included? Because psychological safety starts with inclusion. Are we allowing to so because there are many ways to exclude, and I know the traditional is it's because of maybe color or age or gender, but there are other ways to exclude. I mean, do we exclude? Hey, you're new, so what do you know? And that's another way to exclude. So check first: is everyone included? Is everyone's voice valued? And that's the first. That's the first part. After that, the second is when mistakes happen, how do people respond? Are people said, hey, if you try something, do they punish you, or do they use it as an opportunity to see what we can do better? So that's the second question. How are people treated when things go wrong? Okay. And then the third thing would be, how are people showing up? How are people contributing? Is everybody contributing, or again, it's just the same people? And finally, how do people challenge? Do you see people challenging? When people challenge, is it listened to or is it attacked? So do you want to check if people are included? You want to check if people are allowed to learn when there's problems. You want to check how people are contributing, and finally, you want to see how people are challenging. And that way, you can see if the team is safe or not. That's actually the four stages of psych safety that Timothy Clark uses. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I'm in discovery mode. So like
Sure.
everybody else
Okay.
listening, I'm just in discovery mode. The Lisa asked an interesting question is
Sure.
we for the individual. She says
Hmm?
sometimes
Oh, hi, Lisa.
imposter syndrome, right? The fear of being revealed as a fraud even when you're not, can interfere with psychological safety. Have you seen that? How have you handled
Right.
that when you have an individual who's
Right.
struggling with that?
Right.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. How do you think about that?
Okay. So this is where I think strengths comes in. Yeah. Uh, and because, okay, first, I believe psychological safety, the leader has a big role, but it's not set to the leader. So in that case, I might use my command. I'll make sure, hey, are people being listened to? Is there somebody here who wants to say something and it's not being noticed? And maybe I'll highlight that. And so part of that, to Lisa's question, is that if you see that happening, if you see a teammate that's happening to your teammate, then what can you do to give space for that person to show up? So in other words, that's so rather than telling the person to be courageous, you open the doors for them. And that's why it's the environment. You find a way so that they will feel safe to speak up. So that's my answer to that.
Yeah, well, you've said this a couple times,
Sure.
telling people to be courageous,
Yeah.
right? Or are there other equivalents to that statement, to that sentence? Like, it's a cliche, right?
Yeah.
Are there other cliches in the workplace that we find ourselves repeating or saying, it's time to, as an example, it's time to put on the big boy pants,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. That's
Things like that.
right.
Are there others out there? Are there common ones
Oh,
in the work that you're doing that you hear that, because listen, some of us say those things, and I think it
yeah.
might be a good idea to just think through a little bit, like, are we doing this unintentionally sometimes?
Right. Okay. One thing I always tell leaders: if you want to create psych safety, you should stop saying this line. What is this? Don't give me problems, give me solutions. Right? Because when that happens, then what happens? So what if they don't have a solution?
Right.
What if they don't have this? So what happens? The problem keeps, it keeps growing. So that's something we need to let go. We want to hear people's problems because that way we can help the person. We can work as a team for that problem. And so that's a cliche. Don't give me problems, give me solutions. The other is another would be um, if you want to show up, you gotta fight for it.
Mm.
And why is that? I mean, no, as a team leader, you need to create the space for that. You need to pause. You want the people to oppose you. You give them options. So that's actually part of the best practices for psych safety. Give people time to challenge you. Give people time to oppose you. uh Another cliche would be, hey, be a team player.
Mm,
Let's it's actually, no, you actually want to encourage people. Yeah, okay, so give me an opposing view. If you have a different idea, tell me. And in fact, let's take this time to oppose the idea so that we really see where we are. Because if you feel being a team player, you should agree, then yeah, then basically you're saying, yeah, stop talking. And
mhm.
that's not how teams work now.
Leo, I was reading this HBR article about
Yep.
this, and they talked a little bit about some evolutionary pressures that we have
Mm-hmm.
because as humans, we learn to fight to be successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now we're in work situations, and oftentimes we're taking team situations, and they get very combative because that's how you just
Right.
reminded me of it.
Right.
Like,
Right.
it's like, hey, the the one who puts in the most hours or the one who's killing it.
Right.
We at Gallup, we have a term, you're a rock star, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but then sometimes that puts an enormous amount of pressure on someone. They had a successful moment. Now
Right.
the bar is there's maybe another cliche. Now the bar is raised, right? And and the pressure is, oh, now I need to stay in this mode, and I can't ever pull back. I had this
Right.
successful moment, and I was punished with more work, right?
Right.
And not right, and from that standpoint. So do you find when we think of the combative nature of humans, we're fighting
Right.
against ourselves, our
Right.
own
Right.
nature at times.
Right.
How can we how can we how can we overcome that when it's such a
Okay.
natural tendency to fight and flight? That's just
Okay.
that's just natural. What are some strategies we can do either individually or on teams, mostly probably on
Right.
teams, to help because it's going to happen. So
Right.
how do we get through some of that?
Okay. So, first thing, I'm glad you brought this up because there's another myth that psychological safety means our team agrees all the time.
Hmm.
And that's not true. What I found is that the more psychologically safe teams, they actually have more conflict. They have more conflict. They challenge each other more. They speak up more. I guess the difference is that in this kind of team, what happens is that the conflict is productive. There's a term for this, that there's intellectual friction, but there's no personal friction.
Hmm.
And I think that's where the inclusion is important. That's where understanding this person is not coming from a bad space is important. And when he challenges me, it doesn't mean he's against me. And that's that's an important, very important part of psychological safety. But that will not happen if the person does not feel included or is not recognized for being different. And that's why, again, the strengths comes in. This person may not, this person is not, maybe it's not combative, maybe it just has strong belief.
Hmm.
Maybe this person is
Mhm.
not quiet, he just has high intellection. And understanding
Mhm.
that that person is different and acknowledging that, then we can have more intellectual conflict rather than personal conflict.
I found when I first started working at Gallup, one of the things
Mhm.
because we talk about strengths all the time, we probably
Right.
talk about it more than anybody else does, right? And individuals would in a tense moment would say, I've just got to say this is running up against my belief, or this
Yeah.
is running
Hmm.
up
Hmm.
against my activator, or,
Hmm.
or,
Hmm.
or whatever. And it allowed for a conversation, and then that did not make this personal. And one, the person owned it, right? They were
Hmm.
like, hey,
Yeah.
look, this is my
Hmm.
this is running up
Hmm.
against my fill in the blank, the
Hmm.
theme, right? In owning those pieces. And I think this is what I hear you saying is it's not making it personal, right? It's
Hmm.
it's it's making it. I don't know what the other term to use though. That's not personal, but it allows for this safe space to be able to have this conversation. Then for the other to say, oh, okay, I get it's your. This is actually a problem I have with my significant other sometimes.
Yeah.
My adaptability, she's high
Hmm.
discipline and belief, and my adaptability, and we just clash, right? And sometimes we just got to call it out for what it is, right? And
Yeah.
then and
Mhm.
then be able to move forward. I don't know. Do you want to add anything
No, no.
to that?
We're just talking about that's perfect. If I don't know, my wife, I don't know if she's listening. I'm gonna reveal
Mine is
something.
for sure. Let's just be really clear about that. It's evening
So
here in the United States, so she's in the other room listening for sure.
So I remember when we used to argue, I hated it. And she said, no, no, I need time for myself. I need a break. Like, no, we need to fight about it. We need to deal with it now. And then I realized she has high intellection. And I realized, okay, all right. That's why I get so, and I didn't realize I wasn't respecting that. For me, I was interpreting it as she didn't want to engage. And that's a very bad perspective of how you see your relationship. And I think that's a good example. The strengths allows us to change how we see how we work with each other. So we realize it's not an attack against us. It is just how they're coming across. And in a psychologically safe environment, that's so crucial to understand the person is not against you. They're just sharing their perspective.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I'll go back to that. So a psychologically safe environment actually has high conflict. The difference is the conflict is productive.
And it can be high conflict. It doesn't have to be
It
high
doesn't have to be.
conflict
Yes. Yeah.
to be to be
Right.
successful. Well, I don't want managers out there doing this stuff on purpose, but if it's diverse from a
Yeah.
strengths perspective, if it's diverse,
Hmm.
and even from a cultural perspective, if
Right.
it's diverse, you're gonna expect some conflict to be part of. I have
Mhm.
this
Right.
saying where two or more are gathered, there is conflict. So, you just it's gonna happen in that setting. Ken has this
Sure.
comment. He said, by claiming a safe space when someone feels unsafe, wouldn't it be better to say you're building a brave space? Any thoughts
Okay.
on that?
Okay. So I want to unpack this. So if you are trying to be brave in an unsafe space, then that's not psychologically safe.
Okay.
Then what you're doing is you're practicing courage. Uh, and that's a different construct. That's not because psychological safety is the environment, it's not the person. So in that case, yes, you're trying to be brave because there's no safety, because there is fear. When the environment has fear, then that's not safe. When there is no fear, then that's when it's a safe space. And by the way, if you don't mind, Jim, I'll jump off to something you said earlier about
Yeah.
diversity.
Yeah.
Amy Edmondson in last month's WBEX, she actually showed some data. She showed that the data of diversity and performance, and you know what it showed? It showed a downward line. The more diverse the team, the lower their performance is. So
Mm.
she showed the trend line, but then, okay, but let's show a scatter. So she showed the scatter of the trend line, and they studied what makes it common for diverse teams. What makes so there's so if this is the trend line, so there are some that are going down, some are going up. The ones that are going up, the ones that are successful diversity is because they have psychological safety,
Mm.
and that's something that's we found. It's there are many studies around it. You can only make diverse teams work when there is safety. When there's no safety, well, at least according to our data, that's when diverse teams fail.
Lisa asks a good question, I think, around this. She says, hold on, I'm covering your face. There we go. She
Okay.
says, can psychological safety ever really be achieved? I mean, really? Or are we just being idealistic on this?
Okay. And my answer is yes. And why do I say that? You've been in a team where it's been safe. I think everyone, if I earlier I talked about we've probably been in a team which we've been unsafe where we can't speak up. I think all of us have experienced that. But some point in your life, you've experienced being part of a team that is safe. And if you remember, that was the team where you could be yourself, you can be vocal, you can challenge, and you don't think people will jump at you. And I even bet that's probably your most favorite team of all time
Mm,
when you've ever had a safe team.
mm,
Now, what I think Lisa's question is coming from, however, can organizations be psychologically safe? All right. Uh, because here's another thing psychological safety is a team construct, it is not a company construct. And that's actually another myth. Another myth is that, hey, we want to do psychological safety for organization. Let's do a campaign on psych safety. It doesn't work that way. It's a team construct. The intervention needs to be in a per team level. So it's not so why you can be in the same company, you belong to different teams, you will experience safety differently. So, like maybe your head of marketing, with the executive team, you have a different level of safety. with the team that's reporting to you, it's a different level of safety. You belong to an ad hoc team, it's a different level of safety. It's a team construct. It's not an org construct. It's not a person construct. It's a team construct. So can it be achieved in a team? Yes, because we've all been lucky. I'd like to think all of us have been lucky to be part of a team that's safe. To have an organization that's completely safe, that's a nice aspiration. I would agree.
Maybe a little bit of work associated with that.
Yeah,
You had put in the Eventbrite invite, you had put this kind
yeah,
of question: why do organizations? Why are we shifting away, or why are we
right,
shifting from high performing leaders to high performing teams? I think you
right.
kind of alluded to that right there,
Mm,
but can you talk a little bit more about that? We not to de-emphasize the important role that the manager has, because it's
yes,
very important. But what
yes.
does that mean to you?
Okay. Well, okay. I actually run a lot of leadership sessions where I combine psych safety with what I've learned from It's the Manager. All right. Okay. This is the old way of doing things. And I actually share the historical model of this. The old way of doing things was that the leader was the boss, right? We just follow the boss. The boss is the smart guy. And that's why back then we had the white collar worker and blue collar worker, not that long ago. And all we have to do is follow the boss because the boss is the smart guy. He's the one who studied, he has a degree. We just follow him. And many companies have been successful using that model. That's called the command and control model. And the command and control model makes sense when the world is very predictable and things are going about, things are very routine. Now we're living in a world of change, things are changing very quickly. Some words people have used are VUCA, which is, and the newer word some people are using is Bani. I don't know if you've heard of that. So we have, okay, Bani is, so from VUCA, Bani, the word is now brittle, it's now anxious, it's now nonlinear, and I'm trying to remember the I. Okay. It's okay. But anyway, okay. The idea is that the world is changing very quickly. And the idea is that now what used to be routine before doesn't work anymore today. Back then, only the leader was the smartest guy. Now you have smart guys everywhere. Education and knowledge and information is not just available to a select few, not like before. It's now available to everyone. And second, we're now moving towards a more customer centric business model. The people in the field probably understand the customer more than the boss does, right? And so, what does the leader need to do? He needs to let go that I'm the wisest person, I know everything, I need to involve the team. And that's why the boss needs to move into a coach. And I think this is all the principle behind it's the manager. So, as the leader, don't be the person who says, hey, here's what we're going to do, follow me. The role of the manager now, okay, team, what do you think we should do? And that's the change that's happening now.
When you have managers or leaders who are being, we talk about this new, let me switch this. We talk about this kind of new style of leading where everybody's helping make the decisions, but the managers are not being managed that way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
how do we they're still being held accountable to a command and control model, and they
That's
may
true.
be trying, right, to give
Right.
their team some autonomy, and they may be, but they themselves, how do we help executives, because they're the managers of
Yeah.
managers? How do we help executives see this, right? Because I think this is where it needs to change, just to be
Yes.
very
I
transparent. Yeah.
Okay. I'll answer that two ways. Okay.
Yeah.
So first, that's why when we do a culture change program where we want to have this idea, where we want to create this inclusion, their safety, we always start as much as possible with the executives. They need to see the value first. All right. There's the few we just launched a few weeks ago, and it's really about how, as executives, how can we enable people to do this? Because if it doesn't happen, the managers will find it harder, right? Okay. Now, having said that, okay, so that's why I start with executives when you can. Having said that, I've run some sessions on psych safety. I work with the managers and not the executives. All the time, they tell me, Leo, have our leaders taken this session? Do they understand what psych safety is? Always,
Yeah.
always. So for some, I say, yes, you're lucky. We did it with your executives, and some, no. Okay, so what do you do? What if you believe in psych safety, but you don't think your executives aren't doing it? Okay, the way I've always described it is that you know how we are as parents. We can't change our parents, but we can change how we parent. So what I said is, if you're not getting it from your leader, then do it for your team. Because guess what? You're looking up. The people under you are looking up at you. So because psych safety is a team construct, do it with your team, even if you're not getting it from above. It
Mhm.
can be done. And the future of the organization is probably you. When you get up there, then make it part of the whole organization.
Yeah.
So
Would that be the same advice for big teams where there may be subgroups where it's
yeah,
working and other groups where it's not? Lisa and I are kind of having this conversation in the chat room right now. Thinking about you're never going to get an entire organization. I mean, I think the goal is to
yeah,
get
it's
there. If
yeah,
you
yeah.
take your eye off that
Mhm.
goal and you start, well, it's okay. I mean, we can't get there. So a few teams. At least I know that's not what you mean. I know that's not what you mean. I do like the aspiration of getting there though. But same advice for teams. Say I have a large team of 40, but they're matrix because a lot of teams
Yeah,
are now,
yeah.
right? So they're all matrix with each other, and some things are working and some aren't. What's the advice at the team level then? It's easy to give that advice to a manager, but how can you help teams through that when they may have a healthy dotted line relationship to team A and a
Right.
very unhealthy dotted line relationship to team B?
Okay. So thank you. Okay. And I'm glad we're talking about this as well, because when I talked about team psychological safety, it's a team construct, it doesn't mean division, it doesn't mean function, it means the actual team. And so that includes cross functional teams. So what we've done is that we've actually encouraged teams to really have a conversation on psych safety, not just based on your reporting lines. Really, so if you're a cross-functional team, talk about, so how do we practice safety? Do we make sure everyone's included? Do we make sure, when mistakes happen, we don't punish them? Do we ensure everyone's contributing? So do the intervention with your team. And again, when I say team, I'm not talking function or department. Have that intervention within your team. Now, if the manager is well versed on it, he has the biggest impact. But here's the funny thing about PsychSafe. You don't have to be the leader or the manager to influence it. You can be a member and you can influence psych safety.
Yeah, when we released the manager report,
Yeah,
we had a lot of people saying, "Well, I'm not a manager," and I said,
right.
"You probably manage something."
Yeah.
Like, right, even in an org, and we would come up with like volunteer organizations, or you think, things you might do with your kids, or,
Mhm.
um, but seriously, if you're in a modern organization today that's matrixed,
Yeah.
you're probably on a team.
Mm-hmm.
You're the leader. No one said that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no one gave you that role, but
Mm-hmm.
you're probably the leader in it,
Mm-hmm.
and have that ability to influence those on the team
Mm-hmm.
to, if I understand what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
have that responsibility for the team to provide that psychological safety to
Mm-hmm.
the team,
Mm-hmm.
to be aware of it and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, hey, do people feel safe on this team?
Mm-hmm.
Even in a matrix mode, I think that
Mm-hmm.
responsibility is still there, right? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe can this be a team understanding as well? Can it be a team construct that the team itself is watching for psychological
Yeah.
safety and
Yeah.
calling it out when it's not
Yeah.
there? Is that possible?
Yeah. So as part of the interventions we've had is we actually recommend after a meeting you talk about it. So did everyone feel included? Were there instances where someone was punished when we said something wrong or something different? Did everyone have an equal time to share or equal time to speak? And so that can be done. It's something that the team can check all the time. After every meeting, was everyone safe?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Leo, that's actually a checklist. I don't know if I've ever seen that. And I'm sure
Okay.
it exists, but that'd be a great checklist. We have all kinds of checklists on how to run these kinds of meetings
Yeah.
and what to do. We even had some strengths-based exercises that you could do to
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
start a meeting. Like, okay, spend the first 5 minutes, do these kinds of things. A focus on you is one of those things that
mm-hmm,
we do at beginning of meetings. But I never thought about, like,
mm-hmm,
hey, how do we wrap up meetings? And how do
mm-hmm,
we ask those psychological safety
mm-hmm,
questions?
mm-hmm.
Like, hey, did everyone feel included? Now,
Yeah.
when do you find in your experience, if
Mm-hmm.
we ask, hey, does everyone feel included? If they're not feeling safe, do you think they'll answer that question
Well,
honestly?
so that's your indicator, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
how you'll know that there is something that needs to be done there. So when people are hesitant and they're not speaking up when you ask that question, then I think their reaction will speak more than whatever they're gonna say.
Yeah. Lisa says that checklist. Tim Clark has that has that
Yeah.
list, so
Yeah.
we can pull that from him. I just was kind of thinking through, and I don't run very many meetings anymore that way, but what a great way to now we're super social at Gallup, so we end up having 10 minutes of meeting and then
Right.
25 minutes of getting to know each
Mhm.
other. But boy, that's kind of a for me, that's a new thought of like, hey, let's check back around some quick questions, maybe two or three quick questions. Did everybody feel like they got to be heard in this? What are the other ones? So I heard. What else would I ask?
Um, okay. When someone mistake, how did we handle it?
Okay, right. Oh
Did
yeah,
we have equal time? Did everybody speak up around?
got it.
There is, yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Did,
I actually wrote those down. Now, okay, it's all coming together. I wrote those down, right? Everyone included. How are mistakes handled? How are people showing up? And
and if there's a fourth question,
how do people
did
challenge?
people challenge enough? Yeah. Did
Yeah.
people challenge enough?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
right on. See, look at this. See, I'm a learner in the midst of
Love it.
this conversation. No, it's super great. People always, when I talk about interviewing, and I love to interview people, they say, how do you do that? And I say, I'm just curious. Like
Mhm.
I want to learn things through this. And so that helps me in my own interview skills. Lisa was helping us out a little bit. She had put
Oh, dear, Manny, thank
Vanny in
you.
there. Yeah, brittle, anxious, nonlinear,
Mm,
incomprehensible, and
Comprehensible.
then how do you VUCA? Is that
Fuka.
how we're
Yeah.
VUCA? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. How do you use those two? Let's talk a little bit about what do these two
Okay.
mean, or how do they fit?
Sure. Before we used to use VUCA all the time, a way to describe the world. Volatile. Things are changing. Uncertain. We don't know if what the future will hold. Complex. There's many layers. Ambiguous. We're not clear with cause and effect. Um, and the old way of doing the command and control perspective, let's follow the boss, works because back then the world
Mm,
was more predictable. When I do it in sessions, you remember, our work ends at 5. When you're home, that's it,
yeah.
But now things are happening too fast.
By the way,
Things are
we're
happening
saying
way
that
too
again,
fast.
though. We're saying
Yeah.
that again. Like people are like, I got to get better well being and a better work life balance, and so we are in this really weird transitional spot. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, no, yeah, and that's the reason why. And I think when leaders see that, they realize, yes, the old way doesn't work anymore because things aren't predictable, and that's why you need teams. For Bani is kind of new. It came out this year. Uh, well, actually, I think last year, but a lot of people are talking about it. Brittle. Things get broken easily now. You
Yeah.
know, there's a lot of failure points, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Anxious, well, people, that's I don't have to talk on that side. Non-linear, cause and effect is not clear. Incomprehensible, things just, crazy things happen. And if I
Mhm.
had to list down the crazy things that happened the last year, I'm sure we'll fill up a whole list. So what's the idea? How do you deal with that? So because things are brittle, you need to always have plan B. There should always be a plan B. So you need to be ready to be resilient, to have a plan B. Because people are anxious, we need to create more awareness. And I think that's one of the benefits of the pandemic, uh, that people are now seeing mental health and emotional health is important. Things are non-linear. Okay, I'm trying to learn. So it's there's plan B, there's awareness for N. Trying to remember, for when things are non-linear, what you need to do, there's because they have a BANI as well. So plan B, awareness. The
Mm.
I, if I remember, is intuition. We need to learn to use intelligence, intuition, use data and intuition at the same time. The N I'm trying to remember. But the idea here is that you can only do this if you get more people involved. It can't just be set on one person. And so the model of just the boss deciding everything doesn't work anymore. You want to get as many voices as you can into the conversation.
Mm. We're also building very entrepreneurial cultures inside
Yeah,
organizations. I mean, I think Gallup's a good example of that, where everybody's their own boss. So when you think about going to boss to coach,
yeah.
there's a lot of self coaching that kind of goes
Hmm.
into that. And I think as I worked with Micah through Theme Thursday, I began to see when I added my own strengths in, I began to see some trigger moments, some things I would do when I was triggered for anxiety or when I was triggered because I was worrying about things. I
Okay.
wonder if I need to think through, and I want your opinion on this. wonder if I need to start thinking through that fight and flight, because oftentimes I get a lot of that during the day. I get all kinds of incoming emails from the community and people calling me, and they're angry for whatever reason, right? It's my job to help people get through problems, right? And sometimes I have a fight response right away, and I'm not to that point where I still catch myself
Right.
before I flight or before I send that email that I probably shouldn't have sent. I'm getting better. How can we, either individually or from a team perspective, how can we catch ourselves on this,
Okay.
and how can we make maybe strengths a part of that equation?
Well, first thing when you were saying that, the first thought that comes to mind is that's why everybody needs a coach.
Yeah,
you know, right? We
and I'm
all
the
deal
one
with it.
supposed to be saying those. You're not supposed to just be repeating all of your stuff. No, good. You're good. You're good, Leo. You're good.
Well, we're all different. We all deal with it differently, and so sometimes we need the help of others to help us, figure out how we can deal with that. I mean, I for me, because I was asking myself the same question, how they deal with that, and that's why I have a coach. I work with my coach to help me deal with that, and I think we find ways that work for me. I'm not sure it works for everybody. So yeah, that's one. So it's good if your manager is your coach, so that makes your life a little easier. Uh, for the team, similarly, is allowing people to have a coaching conversations. And I guess this is where the check-ins are important. The
Mm.
check-in shouldn't just be about work. It should really be, so how are you really feeling today? What's going on for you? Uh, and so that's how we can do as a team. And when I say coaching there, again, you don't need to be the manager. We can check in with each other. Yeah, make that part of your system. Make it part of your conversation. And that's, again, going back to psych safety. That's how you make it safe. You allow people to share whatever they're feeling, and you want to honor whatever your feelings. Okay, it's part of inclusion.
So I might be the luckiest guy in the world because I have 12,000 coaches
Yeah.
in my job that want to give me advice. Actually, not such a bad. That's not so bad, because I've actually really grown in this role that I'm in. I've really grown as a human, having access to, and both working and friend relationships with some really bright, helpful, caring people like you,
Mm.
who I can have these conversations with and feel safe, in them. These relationships are these conversation we had always feel safe. So again, I probably come in a role where I come from a point of privilege, and I've got 12,000 really great team members that I work with. I recognize not everybody has that same relationship, and I joke and I jest, but I still have got some work to do, kind of in that area. Can you talk? We've got a few minutes left,
Sure.
and I'd love to, as you think about maybe one of your best success stories in this, and then I want to ask you a little advice on the way out. What kind of
Sure.
advice would you give to coaches? But little success story and then some advice.
Okay. So one of the companies we work with, and I think it's okay I can say the name because we won an award for this, is for Sun Life. Sun Life is a financial company. They're based in Canada. And Sun Life Philippines, we've been working with them for many years. Uh, and they said and we always help them in their 5-year plan. What's the culture that's necessary for that? And then when they're looking for the next 5 years, they said, hey, we became number one as Sun Life because we had people who are good in following, good in executing. They realize we're not going to be successful in that the next few years. So we need people who are willing to challenge, people to question. And they ask, okay, so what culture do we need to do for that? So we didn't sell psych safety. We are selling, we're helping them with their problem of innovation and culture. And we said, okay, maybe for that, you need to create this culture where people are free to speak up and free to challenge. And that was our entry point to psych safety. We did it with the leaders first. Okay. And when we did it with the leaders, we made sure we measured it so that, because you can measure psych safety. You can measure psych safety. The leaders liked it so much, we brought it down to the other leaders. And then they liked it so much, let's bring it to the rest of the organization. So our last 3 years has really been uh, working with people from all over the country to discuss and talk about psych safety. One thing we did well was, and we measured all the major teams to do that. And so We saw how psych safety changed a year later. The metrics went up. The CEO now keeps talking about it now. Psychological safety is something we believe in. We've seen it with the people when we talk to them, they really see it's being practiced. Now, one thing we did do, however, is because the workforce are mostly people who know how to follow, we kind of need to educate them on how to assert themselves. So we had a matching program. It's called the Power of Voice. So you have psych safety being created by the leaders, and we had the Power of Voice to help people to feel comfortable to speak up. Because maybe when they were hiring, they weren't hiring people who were good in speaking up. So they need to learn the skills to do that. And that's one that won us an award. This was with the company I was with Tina, the News Management Strategies. The award was won because it really created a difference for the organization. So that's one. I have, and what I found is I don't normally sell psych safety when I talk to clients. I really check what kind of culture do you need. And it just so happens psychological safety is a good construct for that. And whenever I can, I put in strengths because strengths helps us understand why we're different. And so it's a good
Yeah.
combination, both
Yeah.
strengths and psych safety.
Ken asks the question kind of related to
Sure.
that. He says, when there are equity, diversity, inclusion issues in the workplace, how and when do you introduce Clifton Strengths? So thinking
Okay.
if you're working with an organization and they got some of the other things they need to work on, how would you, or what are your thoughts around that?
Okay. So in terms of diversity and there's one thing I think the Philippines has an advantage of. We're very good with diversity. I think we have probably one of the highest percentages of women CEOs in the world. We've had a few women presidents. So because of that, it's not, and I think Filipinos are known for being good working with different nationalities. I think that works out. So it's not as much as a problem here. Now, having said that, I've done a lot of work on ASEAN. Okay, and ASEAN they really see it because I think there's a more mix of cultures. Okay, I find that strengths is great for inclusion. I find it's great for inclusion because at the end of the day, it really talks about why are people excluded, and people are excluded because they're different for whatever reason. And Clifton Strengths gives us a framework that being different is a good thing. Being different is something special, and that's why normally when I want to do work with diversity inclusion, I always try to include strengths as a very early intervention. Okay, for that. So yeah.
Lisa asked this question. I'm not sure I completely understand, but I'm going to throw that up. She says, "This is great. A sales question. You're working on a
Oh yeah.
5-year plan. And what culture do you want to support it?"
Yeah, I think she was reacting to when I was talking about the company we're working with. Yeah, for me, and that's where I kind of like going. My current company is called Fearless. I before because I think I've been working in culture for many years. We're working on strategy as well, and I think that's where it merges. Now I think the link between strategy and culture is much more stronger now. You know, and when I ask people, when a company asks me, Leo, we want to do culture change, I first ask, okay, what is your strategy? Because I don't want to just do culture for culture's sake. There needs to be a reason for that. It needs to be linked to. If not, it's not going to work. So yeah, I agree with you, Lisa. That's a great question to ask. What's your plan for the next 5 years, and what culture do you need to support it?
Leo, you think in the years you've been working at the Clifton Strengths and you've got the ear of, a couple thousand coaches that listen to Call to Coach, in the last minute or two that we have, any advice you'd give them? You maybe even a little beyond what we talked about with psychological safety, but any thoughts to them? How would you encourage them? Maybe that's a good way to say it. How'd you
Okay.
encourage those coaches?
Okay, maybe I'll answer it the way I was able to introduce strengths, at least here with the companies I work with. If you're in the corporate space, because I know this is going to be different if you're in the personal space. If you're in the corporate space, I always start with what is the business case for strengths. I linked it to engagement, I linked it to managers, I linked it to impact, I linked it to numbers. When I do that, for me, to be honest, it's an easy sell when I work with leaders. And I think a common mistake by some is that when you're working with corporate, you talk about strengths from a personal level. Not that it's a bad thing, but that's not what they're there for. They're there. I want to make my business better. I want to make my company better. So in that case, it helps that we talk their language. And I find when we do that, it's an easy sell. And then suddenly they get their buy-in, and we're doing it for the rest of the org. So that's one. Understand, if you're working with business, speaking the language of business. That's one. Uh, Now, if you're working in the personal space, so I guess, just like any marketing or sales person will tell you, understand what they need, and then um, see how strengths can help them for their need. So maybe
Mm.
that's a big picture perspective of
I
how to
love it.
implement.
I love it. Some good
Yeah.
advice. I took some of your advice. Asked the chat room. Want to make sure everybody was heard and everybody was included. Chat room in the conversation. I hope that you felt like it is one of those. It is a small exercise in inclusion as we've got all these comments coming in. I don't always pick them all, but it's like sometimes I have to be efficient in whatever. But it is Leo. It's such a good reminder. I'm going to take those four. I'm going to write them down and I'm going to stick them somewhere, put them on my notebook, whatever. And I think what I'm going to start doing is think through them before I reply to an email. This is probably the easiest way for me to implement this idea of providing psychological safety for those in the coaching community that I'm working with. I find that's my responsibility. Now, you've given it to me as my responsibility to think through in my response. Am I, did I listen? How am I showing up in this, right? How did they show up, in that? Um, am I, because sometimes, we can do this in support. We can be condemning, like, hey, it went to your spam box. You should have been smart enough to, right? Right? Did you
Right.
turn it on and turn it off? Kind of thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
Move, and so I think there's some opportunities even in those little interactions
Yeah.
to provide these these
Mm-hmm.
these uh, ideas
Mm-hmm.
to help create even these micro relationships that
Mm-hmm.
between each other, because a team is two, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can I provide psychological safety to those I'm working with, even if it's a short-term relationship, helping them get logged into Gallup Access or helping them find resources or helping them on Facebook. So if you're listening, you guys can hold me all accountable to this. I'm going to begin to think through this. And Leo, thanks for spending some time with us. We're getting and Lisa did people challenge enough. So um the appreciate you, and I appreciate you doing this on a Saturday morning. I For the folks who are listening to the podcast, it's Friday night in the US, it's Saturday morning where you are. Where are you calling in from
In
today?
Manila. I'm calling from
You're in
Manila,
Manila.
Philippines. Yeah. Yeah.
So 13 hours I think is what we figured
Yeah.
out.
Mm-hmm.
And so thanks for doing that at this time. It's been kind of fun. Big thanks to the chat room as well for coming out on a Friday night. A lot of folks from the West Coast and folks from all over, and lots of great conversations out there, and lots of thanks as well. And so we thank you for doing that. Leo, hang on tight for me 1 second.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me wrap this up, and then we'll
Mm-hmm.
close it. I want to remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available now in Gallup Access. Head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths, log in, hit the resources menu, upper left, drop that down, hit the resources tab, and then search for anything. A lot of stuff is there. Google it. Google be your friend too. We have got a lot of resources just available at gallup.com. If you want coaching or master coaching, or you want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, just like Leo is, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. We'll send you some info. Don't forget to sign up on Eventbrite, gallup.eventbrite.com. Follow us there, and you'll get a notification whenever we do episodes like this. We'll be a little light going into the fall, but I got some more stuff coming up this winter that you'll want to be a part. Well, winter for us, anyways, in the Northern Hemisphere. You know how inclusive, or we're not inclusive in the Northern Hemisphere? We're always saying summer and winter and spring and fall. None of those down south. That's the exact opposite. It's winter in Brazil. It's winter in
And
Australia.
we don't have winter here. So
No, and you don't ever have winter. So those are not inclusive. By the way, the seasons are not inclusive. I'm just going to call it for that. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/group/called to coach. And we want to thank you for joining us today. Thanks for coming out, especially for the live audience. Appreciate it. We'll be back next time. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.